Morning. Welcome to the this plenary session. This session, uh, which will be taken by Dr. Swaranpreet Singh. Dr. Swaranpreet Singh is a professor of social and community psychiatry at Warwick Medical School, University of Warwick in UK. I'm just waiting. Swaran, are you there?
I'm here, Rakesh.
Okay. Welcome.
I don't know if you can see me, but I'm here, and sorry about being late.
Okay, no issue. Switch on the video, Dr. Swaran.
Sir, it's there.
Acha, he has come. Okay, good. Nice to see you now. Okay. So, welcome to the session. The hall is full. They are waiting eagerly for you, Swan. So, I think you can begin the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Rakesh. Let me just start the presentation and see if you can if I share my screen. Rakesh, can you confirm that you can see it?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very sorry I can't be there personally. I would have loved to. Everything I know about psychiatry, I learned from PGI and from my esteemed teachers, and even more from my peers like Devashish. I am going to talk about something that's been going on for, I think, ever since the origin of psychiatry, which is the anti-psychiatry movement and its main criticisms of psychiatry. All of these criticisms have been very cogently answered, and they have been made. But of course, they never go away. And that was the second half of my title, which I haven't put here. Why don't they ever learn? And I feel that every generation must rehearse these arguments, because there are legitimate criticisms of psychiatry to be made, as they are of any profession and every institution and every organization. Psychiatry is unique, and I will emphasize the fact that psychiatry is unique in many ways, and I will emphasize that this is a strength, and we should see it as a strength. Every generation must learn about these criticisms, and every generation must think what is the validity of these criticisms and how to respond, both internally, if the criticisms are valid, and externally, if these are unfair. I emphasize that everything that I'm saying today, it's a personal opinion. I've now been doing psychiatry for 35 years. And I feel I've reached a stage where I can pontificate. So I'm not going to give you data and p-values and numbers. I will just share with you what is entirely a personal opinion. You're very welcome to disagree with it. Before I start, I'll just check. Rakesh, can I just check you can hear and see me all right?
Yeah, it's very well visible.
Okay, and audible, I presume. Okay, so I started by saying that psychiatry is unique. It is, because the human body is complex, but the complexity of the human body is nothing as compared to the complexity of the human brain. There is a lovely statement: the mind was so simple that we could understand it. We would be so simple that we couldn't. The human brain has trillions upon trillions upon trillions upon possible connections. And although in psychiatry we do simplify them in saying, brain function is localized, and so the frontal lobe does this, and the temporal lobe does this, and although that is broadly correct, the intricacies of the brain connectivity still elude us. What eludes us even more is the relationship between the brain and the mind. Is mind a part of the brain? Is mind secreted by the brain? Is mind nothing more than an artifact of the brain? These are hugely important questions. And as far as I can tell, they have not been answered. I see books called Consciousness Explained or grand titles which suggest that we have answered the question of the relationship between brain and mind and what consciousness is, but that's just neuroscience hubris. We really haven't understood it. My bet is that we won't. My bet is that we cannot understand the mind using the tools of the mind. We are inside the mind. We cannot see it empirically, objectively from outside. Many of you will know what the Milky Way looks like, and you will have seen it with your own eyes in the night sky, or you would have seen photographs of the Milky Way. But actually, there is no way to photograph the Milky Way. We do not have a photograph of the Milky Way because we are inside the Milky Way. To take a photograph of the Milky Way, you have to be outside the Milky Way. And we've never been outside it, or we've never been, and we've never sent a camera outside the Milky Way. So I think that the fact that we are dealing with something so complex, and yet we are surprisingly successful, is a huge achievement. The fact that we don't know is not a problem. It'd be lovely if we did know, but it's not a problem, and it certainly does not diminish our ability to help people who have a broken mind. I want to raise two fundamental principles. I must say that I'm speaking largely of British and Western psychiatry as it is practiced now. Many of the things that I say, or some of the things I say, may not apply to psychiatric practice in countries outside of the West. So many of the problems and criticisms of psychiatry that I present to you have been made in the Western setup. I hope they are still relevant to you. So I want to make two fundamental points before I get into the criticisms themselves. One is about the nature of public debate, and one is about the nature of entities. The Western model of logic is Aristotelian. The Latin for it is tertium non datur, which is the principle of the excluded middle. The middle is not given. So a statement is either true or it's false. And this here is the British Parliament, where when things are argued, they're argued in the sense that only one side can be correct. For me to be right, you have to be wrong. And although this may sound to you a simplification, it does get reduced to that. Raising taxes is good, or raising taxes is bad. Poverty causes crime, or poverty doesn't cause crime. And that kind of debate, which was perhaps useful at one stage, is certainly useful in mathematical axioms and straightforward statements, is not true for complex processes. There is another form of logic, and I wonder how many of you know it. It is called Chatuskoti. It is supposedly, it originates from the Buddha, from Buddhism. I haven't been able to find a direct quote from Buddha, but the proof, the mathematical proof of Chatuskoti was given by Nagarajan, the 4th century Buddhist logician and mathematician. Chatuskoti, instead of saying a statement is true or it's false, says a statement may be true, it may be false, it may be both true and false, it may be neither true nor false. And although it sounds paradoxical, I suggest you go back and think about any profound statement. And you will find that in some Some aspects it's true, and some it's false, some it's neither true nor false, some it's both true and false. And the logic of binary thinking doesn't work in complex entities. So what is a complex entity? And this is the second fundamental point that I'm making. I raised this in an editorial in The Lancet some years back in relationship to the therapeutic nature of inpatient admission and doctor-patient relationship. And the difference is as follows. A jet engine on the left is a complicated entity. It is made up of hundreds of moving parts, all performing a function. No one person can fully understand all the workings of the jet engine. But in theory, you could write a manual which explains the function of each part and how it is linked to the other. And so when one part malfunctions, the whole system may malfunction, but technically you have to fix that one part. And then the system, if the other parts are functioning, is restored to equilibrium. So complicated entities are very, very huge and interlinked, but they are linear in their functioning. The weather is a complex entity. We know all the laws that determine our weather, and yet we cannot predict it precisely. And that's because weather is a complex phenomena where you start with original conditions, but the outcome has a feedback loop, positive or negative, which changes the initial conditions. So you have a dynamic interplay between initial conditions and outcomes, cause and effect, where the effect is constantly changing the cause. So you can never, ever be predictive in the way that you can in a complicated entity. The human body, a cell, a living organism, the brain, the mind, society, a school, a hospital, these are all complex entities. You think there is a problem, you try and solve it, you change the effect in some unexpected manner, which changes the original conditions. You have someone comes to you with a headache or fever, you give them paracetamol, you think it'll act on prostaglandins and the fever will go away. They get Stevens-Johnson syndrome and they die because you are dealing with a complex entity. It's relevant to psychiatry because I've seen it now in Britain. I've worked with I've worked with every successive government since 2004. And when there is a psychiatric scandal or a problem, it is very seductive for someone like me to go to the policymakers and say, I know what the problem is. It's this screw that needs tightening. Give me more money. I'll tighten this screw. Hospitals are bad. Give me money and I'll set up community services. Community is a scandal. Give me money. I'll set up this. And it's very seductive for the politician or policymaker to think that we will tighten this screw and all will be well. And yet, there are unexpected consequences of that decision which causes a new problem somewhere else along the pathway. This is not a problem to be solved. This is a reality to be accepted. We are dealing with complex entities. The human mind is complex, not complicated. With that, I'll come on the criticism. So here is an example of what goes for public debate in the UK. Will self is a kind of one of those writers in UK who get considered as intellectuals. Tom Burns, who was a very eminent psychiatrist, one of the most eminent of his generation, upon his retirement wrote a book about psychiatry called Our Necessary Shadow. And this is a review of the book by Will Self. And you can see Will Self says, psychiatry has no credibility left at all. We are just drug pushers. Now, if Will Self had a leaky tap, I don't want to personalize it, but I have to use examples. So hence this one. If we had a leaky tap, or his car broke down, and he went and the plumber or the car mechanic said, "This is the problem with your car," I don't think Will Self would argue that I know better than you, even with a plumber, let alone a neurosurgeon. But when it comes to psychiatry, everyone is an expert. The Guardian newspaper in particular is an expert on mental health. I've yet to see a single statement about psychiatry which comes close to being factual in the Guardian, because the whole purpose of news nowadays is to use a fact to promote an agenda. So it's propaganda masked as news. The Guardian is not the only newspaper that does it. They all do it. But in psychiatry, it becomes very damaging because our patients and their families, bewildered as they are, want a simple explanation. And what better explanation there's than psychiatrists are drug pushers in the pocket of the pharma company. Don't listen to them. It's very comforting. Our patients don't fare any better. So they are portrayed either as homicidal or rebellious free spirits, like Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or simpletons with profound truths like Dustin Hoffman in The Rain Man, and of course Hannibal Lecter, a psychiatrist who when he's not treating patients, he's eating them. He literally eats his patients. Or John Nash, A Beautiful Mind. And so our patients also get their humanity and their individual strengths stripped of them, and they get reduced to caricatures. And that's a thought for another time. Today, I'm focusing on the caricatures of psychiatrists. The first caricature of psychiatrists is a straw man caricature. The straw man, as many of you will know, is the fallacy where you reduce the argument to a similar argument, but it is not really true. And so we are straw men. Psychiatry straw men are created. So the one that's very common is that psychiatry is biomedical, reductionistic, and dehumanizing. And so the argument there would be, if you are talking about schizophrenia and you mention D2 receptors, they say, you are being reductionistic. You have dehumanized the patient. That's a straw man. And you will all know these books, which basically talk about the biological reductionism of psychiatry, or how psychiatric drugs have side effects. Blimey, who knew that medicine could have side effects? What a great revelation these people are making, that drugs have side effects. What is very interesting is that some of these people, and I know you will recognize some names here, are practicing psychiatrists. What they never tell us is, right, you don't reduce people to crooked molecules. How do you treat them? What is your humane way of treating patients which is effective, which you are hiding from us? I have never known a psychiatrist who sees a patient walking through the door and says, "Here comes a dysfunctional dopamine receptor." I've never known it. I mean, if anyone does it, I don't see how you could do that. How you could, when you talk to a human being, you're not talking to a dysfunctional dopamine molecule. Just like when you're talking to someone with a broken bone, you're not talking to a fracture. You're talking to the human being. But this is a very powerful caricature, and sadly, it is also very common among our colleagues who use exactly the same therapies that we do. and yet are very happy to castigate the very profession through which they make their living. Another argument is that we are con men. We make it up as we go along. You know, we don't really, our treatments, our diagnosis, our methods, our categories have no validity, right? Okay, brother, what would you like? For you, my brother, I'll give you 25% discount. You don't want depression, have a bit of schizophrenia. No schizophrenia, we'll give you a bit of manic depression. And we are con men. The greatest example of that is the Rosenhan experiment. I teach medical students, and it's surprising and slightly sad that none of them ever knows about this. Maybe it's my age, or maybe young people are less interested in history than old buffers like me. Rosenhan published, a Stanford psychiatrist, professor, very, very famous, groundbreaking experiment published in the Science, where he asked undergraduates to go to psychiatric clinics and claim that they could hear three things, their name being called, thud, or ouch. And then all of them were admitted, they were given drugs, they were called schizophrenic, and their behavior was then considered abnormal. This was an absolute wake-up call, 1973 paper for psychiatry. Everything you see about psychiatric diagnosis and DSM, all of this followed from this experiment, although we attribute it to the US-UK Diagnostic Project, which also followed from this. US-UK Diagnostic Project looked at what is the rate of diagnosis of schizophrenia in US and UK, and found US was diagnosing several times higher. And that's how all of our diagnostic Apena criteria came first, and all the other diagnostic criteria came from there. So the argument was that psychiatrists have no way of making a diagnosis. They just make it up as they go along. They are con men. Well, there are very valid criticisms of Rosenhan, which have already been made several times in psychiatric literature. But I want to reveal to you something recent. Susanna Callahan has written a book called The Great Pretender. You have to read the book. I will read a review of the book. Susanna Callahan, shows that this research is a spectacularly successful case of scientific fraud. Susanna Callahan could not trace the original patients who had taken part in that experiment, nor could all of them, nor could she, when the ones she did, she found that what was stated in the paper that was published in Science versus what really happened were completely different things. This paper is a scientific fraud. Okay. Now you could say the criticism of the paper is still valid, and I'll come to that in a minute. This is a fraudulent paper. Science has yet to publish, as far as I know, I may be wrong. I don't think Science has published an apology or retracted the paper. The paper should be retracted. And I suggest you read the book to see the nature of the fraud and the extent of damage it did to psychiatry. So this is one kind of anti-psychiatry which is based on a lie, really. But there is a truth to the fact that we don't have external validating criteria for our conditions. So I'm giving you two examples here of diagnoses as they evolve in medicine. On the left is treatment for dropsy. So the person is having fluid drained from his abdomen, probably for ascites. Dropsy was the general name for edema, and it was considered a single condition, and the treatment was drainage of the liquid. And for centuries, dropsy was dropsy. It is only when science advanced enough to know that there could be cardiac, hepatic, and renal causes of dropsy did we start breaking down dropsy into individual components. The point here is that we are at a stage in psychiatry where we are not able to break down our complex diagnostic entities into more basic units. That may happen, and it may not happen. It may not happen. But that's not a fault of psychiatry. That's the nature of the beast we are dealing with. And again, I'll come to that. The second diagnosis is on the right, the diagnosis of spermatoria. I wrote about this many, many years ago when there was a debate going on making Dhat syndrome. Many of you in India will know Dhat and Dhatu. Bachpan ki galtiyan is the cause of Dhat syndrome. Dhat syndrome is the leakage of white fluid in your urine. Dhat syndrome was also recognized in the West. In the UK, it was called spermatoria. There's the article in Lancet from the mid-18th century, which you can find. Its case, spermatoria is a cause of blindness and insanity. And the treatment of spermatoria is to take two wooden pegs, the size of a pigeon's egg, very precisely measured, size of a pigeon's egg, insert them into your rectum to press on the prostate to avoid leakage of that precious fluid. Diagnosis you make with the basis of knowledge that you have at a given time. The purpose of classification, as someone has very beautifully put, is carving nature at the joints. Where are the natural joints where you can carve meat, where you can separate big fleshy items away from each other? Now, there are two problems with that when it comes to psychiatry. One is that mental functions are not neatly carved. You could take out perception. Perception can be neatly carved, sensation. So you could say the sensory apparatus, and that's why most books of neuroscience focus on the sensory system, because they are neatly carved. But the relationship between thought and emotion, or between anxiety and depression, there isn't a neat separation where we can carve into a diagnostic entity. So that's point number one. Point number two is that even in a relatively good classification system, boundaries are hazy. This is the duck-billed platypus, which is half mammal, half bird. Well, not half, you know what I mean. Part mammal, part bird. The existence of a duck-billed platypus does not negate the existence of mammals and birds. Just like the presence of schizoaffective disorder does not diminish the value of having a diagnosis of schizophrenia and depression. Boundaries in classification system are always hazy. So in psychiatry, we don't have joints. If we create joints, if we create categories, the boundaries of those categories will necessarily be hazy. There is nothing wrong in that. It's not a weakness of psychiatry. It's the nature of the phenomena we deal with. And when the argument is that by diagnosis, we reduce a person to a name, that is not right. In psychiatry, we do two things. We do diagnosis, which says, what is this person suffering from, which is similar to other people? And when we do a formulation, we say, why is this person with their unique life story coming to us at this point in time? It is more important to know what sort of a person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has. So the second half, what kind of a disease a person has, is diagnosis. What is the person who has a disease is formulation. And I'll make one more point about diagnosis, which was suggested to me by John Cooper many years ago, and I love that. When we say ships sail using latitude and longitude, and you explain that to someone, these are lines on the surface of the globe, and someone turns around and says, hang on, I've been looking on the ground and I can't see these lines. I can't see the latitude or longitude carved anywhere. You are just making it up. Of course, you're just making it up. It's a conceptual map. These are not actual lines on the ground. These are the conceptual map which scales the globe in a particular way so our ships can sail. So we know exactly where we are at a given time on the surface of the globe. Our diagnoses are like that. They are a conceptual map of the bewildering array of feeling the patient has, and we say, where are we with this patient? And so we can map the right course of treatment. Diagnosis, schizophrenia doesn't have to exist outside like a tumor does. You don't have to weigh it or cut it up. It's not like that. Schizophrenia is a conceptual map of a cluster of symptoms which guides our treatment. Carrying on with the Kahneman argument, the argument that the psychiatric criticism is that we don't know how our treatments work. You don't know how lithium works. Oh, ECT is a very good one. You don't know how ECT works, hence ECT can't work. Sure, we may not know how ECT works. But how did you draw the conclusion that therefore it doesn't work? There is evidence of sailing between India and Egypt more than 5,000 years ago. More than 5,000 years ago, we did not have the understanding of the solar system or of the cosmos that we have now. But sailors were using the celestial map. They were using constellations in the sky to guide them to the right destination. They did not know how the constellations worked. They did not know how stars, what moved, the sun or the earth. But they were able to get from India to Egypt because the constellation system works. ECT works. We may not know how it works precisely, but that is not an argument. Whether something works and whether you know how it works are the same thing. I know whether my computer works or doesn't work, whether my car works or doesn't work. I don't know how my computer works. So what should I say? I don't know my computer works, so therefore I'm not going to use it. It's a nonsensical argument. I've covered this. Oh yeah, maybe I'll come back to this. This idea that we think of our treatments as chemical cures and our treatments are toxic. I'll give you an example of this. How this debate plays out. This is an anti-psychiatric drugs don't work book chapter. Rather than seeing mental health as a biological or medical issue and assuming that medication will cure non-existing underlying illnesses, medication instead should be used sparingly and in response to specific problems. There are so many things wrong with this statement. It is saying mental health problems cannot be a biological or medical issue. How does the author know that? The author's argument is that they are also societal problems. Sure. But so is hypertension, and so is diabetes. Diabetes is as much as a social problem as a problem of blood glucose regulation. Why are these two positions contradictory? Are we not allowed to see a problem from more than one angle? So then goes on to claim non-existing underlying illnesses. And then medication should be used sparingly and in response to specific problems, as if we psychiatrists put medication in the water supply of a city, or we go and lasso people in and force drugs onto them. Of course, we use drugs for medication for specific problems. We don't use them randomly. You don't roll a dice when a patient comes into the office or flip a coin. It's just nonsense. But these are very powerful criticism in the sense that they have very far-reaching impact. And I never see in day-to-day debates psychiatrists standing up and defending these. Then, of course, there is another caricature which is peculiar to UK and US, but the Anglophone world. Europeans have not really got there. They will, which is that psychiatry is Eurocentric, racist, fascist, and an agent of social control. The Eurocentric argument is very interesting, which is in this book, Mental Health, Race, and Culture, which is that the psychiatric system arose in the West, and hence those diagnoses like schizophrenia have no validity in non-Western populations. And that has been taken to an extreme in this American book, which says schizophrenia has become a black disease because it's basically a racist construct. The author has also written a book called Dying of Whiteness, so you can understand the author's ideological viewpoint. How to there are so and of course in the Guardian I get there is lots of argument about epidemiologically there is more serious mental illness in migrant groups in Europe, and hence the cause is psychiatry is racist. There is more cardiovascular disease in the Asian immigrant population all over the Western world. Nobody says cardiologists are racist. It's an epidemiological finding. That is epidemiology. It's a study of clustering of populations. Are psychiatric diagnoses culture specific? Well, on the left up there is Mahabharata. And if you read the Gita, at the beginning of Gita, Arjun asks Krishna to take his chariot to the middle of the two armies. And he says to Krishna, I see my uncles and brothers and teachers and elders on the other side. How can I kill them? And then he describes the sensation. He says, my heart is pounding, I'm short of breath, my hair is standing on its end. It's a beautiful description of a panic attack. As is Rama in Mahabharata. Rama is despondent after Sita's death. And by some accounts, he commits suicide. Other accounts say he committed Jal Samadhi. He walked into the river. Human emotions are universal. Melancholia, described by Hippocrates, and Avicenna's description. Avicenna, I think if I'm not mistaken, he separated delirium from mania. One was Janoon of one kind, and one was Janoon of another. Mental illnesses are universal. There is an argument that our criteria for non-psychotic disorder has been changing. So what would be considered depression as an entity in one culture may not be considered a mental illness in another. And that's absolutely fine. But depression as suffering is a universal human malady. So, and I think I have one, I'll do this. So here the confusion that people are making, our critics are making, is between mechanism and meaning. Now for my mother, for my elders, for my clan, as I remember my grandparents and my parents, dukkha was an existential aspect of being. To be alive was to be dukhi. In Sikhism, it says, Nanak dukhiya sab samsar. Oh Nanak, the whole humanity suffers. In Buddhism, suffering is the root cause. Suffering is caused by desire, and suffering is the root of all our afflictions, we are afflicted because we have desires, and the cycle of suffering ends when we give up desires. In Hinduism, the cycle of suffering ends when we pay our karmic debt. In all these traditions, dukkha is central to being alive, not a technological problem to be solved. And yet, if people in India, or Sikhs, or Hindus, or Tamils, or Eskimos, or first world natives get depressed, the mechanism is the same. The mechanism of depression is the same. The cultural meaning may be different. Cultural psychiatry makes this enormous mistake by confusing meaning with mechanism. And so they think biology doesn't take into account culture. Biology is a different way of looking at beings than culture is. So, so where does this all play out? It plays out in debates in the UK. Are illnesses caused by nature or nurture? Is it better to use medicine or psychotherapy? Should people be treated in community or hospital? Are psychiatrists as biomedical practitioners as compared to others who are holistic therapists? This is all logic, binary logic. The fact is that these are complex statements, and Chatuskoti is a better logic to use here than binary logic. And finally, we have a problem at the other end, which is that our conditions do not lend themselves to the kind of pure methodologically robust RCTs that other branches of medicine can do, because we are dealing with very complex entities, not complicated entities. So our medical colleagues often think that our evidence base is weak, and that's not true. Antipsychotics have been tested more. There are more RCTs on antipsychotics, I think, than any other medication group. And yet we know there are limitations to the hegemony of the RCT as well. So we are astride this complex phenomena of the mind, where we are trying to use simple binary logic to either justify ourselves or to stand up to our criticisms, when we should be standing astride and saying, ours is a little bit more complex. This is not an excuse. This is not a weakness. This is the truth. This is a fact. We are dealing with more complex things, can be reduced to binary outcomes. I'm going to end. I realize my time is going up. This is, though you will know, Arwadi, where patients at a faith healing center died because they were tied up. I'm doing a very big project trying to work with faith healers in India and Bangladesh, because I see a lot of problems where there are no psychiatrists. Taking away psychiatrists is not going to reduce suffering of humanity. We are not the cause of our patients' suffering. We are the only way that is left for help for them. I don't have time to tell you, but I treated this patient who was with really caught between these cultural dynamics, being told psychiatry is bad, and lost all her, not her life, but everything that made life worthwhile, but got better. And when she got better, she said, "Where were you when I needed you?" If you want to criticize psychiatry, first go to places where there is no psychiatrist. I do a lot of work in sub-Saharan Africa, have big projects over there. If you dislike psychiatry, go to those places and see how much suffering there is for those who are mentally ill. And where there is no mental health legislation, most patients, these are recent photographs, most patients are chained. So here are my 5 for the junior among us. I hope you don't mind me giving you some piece of personal advice. Do not be embarrassed or ashamed of your profession. Surgeons strut about, and psychiatrists are often kind of apologetic for their existence. Our medical colleagues say we are like social workers, and our social worker colleagues say you are too medical. That is our strength. We are astride and above both disciplines. Be proud and loud in your arguments for psychiatry. Do not argue internally to make an ideological point. Do not argue that drugs are necessarily superior to psychotherapy, or psychotherapy is necessarily superior to drugs. They both have a place. Nobody says after a broken bone, you can either have physiotherapy or you can have a plaster. Nobody does that. Why do we do it in psychiatry? It's silly. When services are being set up, don't argue for one service and ignore the rest. Patient's journey requires multiple stages of multiple types of therapies. Don't insist that investment should be in one thing, because it'll make the rest weak. And there should be a 5th commandment. I'm sorry, this is I can't count, and I'll tell you, I've forgotten what the 5th one is now. Do not collude in psychiatry bashing. Be very mindful of the criticisms of psychiatry. Be very introspective and reflective of your own practice. Make sure you don't add to the suffering of your patients. Make sure you treat patients in a humane and compassionate manner. But do not do that by bashing the profession as such. That is, the fifth commandment was always remember that we are astride disciplines. Don't narrow yourself down to one psychiatry, one discipline. Psychiatry is a beautifully judicious mix of medicine, anthropology, psychology, sociology. It's a wonderfully broad umbrella under which many flowers, thousands of flowers can bloom. Do not restrict the definition of what psychiatry is. I think I'll stop here. I don't know if questions are part of the session. I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry again. I hope I made sense. I hope you followed it, what I was saying. Thank you very much for your attention.